This week on Jerusalem Dateline, comeback. Benjamin Netanyahu pulls off a surprise victory and sweeps back into power stronger than before. How did he do it? And what does it mean for Israel's future? Plus, the Islamic ISIS army has taken more than homes and churches. This mother grieves for her 4-year-old daughter taken by Islamic militants. Still, she hopes and prays for her safe return. And by the rivers of Babylon, ancient artifacts reveal new facts about one of ancient Israel's most trying times. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. Prime Minister Netanyahu scored a stunning victory this week. Just a few days ago, experts were writing his political obituary. But the voters gave him an overwhelming triumph and put him in position to form the next government. His victory sent shockwaves to capitals from Tehran to Washington. Israeli voters delivered a clear message to the White House, the media, and the world. Thanks for your help, but we'll keep our prime minister. What was supposed to be a tight race that favored the leftist Zionist Union turned overnight into a surprisingly strong victory for the nationalist right led by Netanyahu. The prime minister quoted the book of Joel in his victory speech.
I want to thank you all the citizens of Israel, for faith in Israeli democracy and for the faith in our one and only country. With your help and with the help of God, we will protect her together, and Judah will be inhabited forever, and Jerusalem for all generations.
Facing negative poll numbers and a hostile media, Netanyahu told a large nationalist rally on Sunday that his Likud party could close the gap between his and the leftists and the national parties. It appears he did just that and surprised even his supporters. Every pre-election indicator said Israelis would vote their pocketbooks and vote Labor. But in the end, security concerns prevailed.
I think that the Israeli public understood that despite all the issues and all the problems, when we see the threats of Iran, Hezbollah, and Hamas, the Likud is the best leading party to lead the nation for the next 4 years.
Netanyahu will now bypass parties on the left and try to form a government of the right. But he will have to focus on the high cost of housing and other social issues as well. That contributed to the 24 seats won by Labor and the good showing of Kulanu, a Likud offshoot that the prime minister will need for his majority. Meanwhile, Netanyahu's victory sets Israel and the Obama administration on a potential collision course over Iran. The Director of National Intelligence just removed Iran and Hezbollah from its list of threat assessments, while Netanyahu calls Iran the #1 state sponsor of terror in the world. Joining me to talk more about the Israeli elections are CBN senior editor John Wagi and CBN correspondent Julie Stahl. John, first to you, what was the U.S. reaction to the Netanyahu's victory?
Well, first of all, Chris, this was a big triumph personally for Benjamin Netanyahu. It was also a big defeat for Barack Obama and a defeat for his view of the Middle East and where he wants to go with it. So the reaction's different in the United States. Congress is delighted, most of Congress. The New York Post is delighted. The New York Times is depressed. And the Obama administration and the State Department are depressed.
Julie, one of the big issues, I guess the two big issues in the Israeli elections were economic issues and security. And how did that play out in the election?
Well, Netanyahu was obviously the man that everyone said was Mr. Security. But he said immediately that in his speech, his acceptance speech or his victory speech, he didn't even mention Iran. He mentioned housing costs and other economic issues. So it's clear that this new government that Netanyahu will probably form is going to be focused also on economic issues.
And how is this going to affect negotiations with the Palestinians? Because he said something right before the election about...
That's right. Right before the elections, he said he was not in favor of the establishment of a Palestinian state. He also said in his acceptance speech that Jerusalem was going to be from generation to generation, quoting from the book of Joel. So he said he's ready for talks, but the Palestinians said they're not wanting to... They will enter into talks, but they will only talk about based on a two-state solution with Jerusalem as its capital, and both of those are non-starters for Israel.
Right, John, we're hearing that the United States might go to the UN, which is something they haven't done before.
Right, they were waiting presumably until the outcome of the elections, in case the labor leftist union won. They were planning then to unveil their whatever diplomacy they could, but in the meantime they wanted to lay low. Now they're making noises as if they want to go to the Security Council and force a two-state solution on Israel and the Palestinians, which of course would be, the Israelis would object strongly to that. And so it's kind of rough waters ahead possibly for Netanyahu, even though he's won a clear victory in Israel.
One issue overshadowing the elections was the Iran nuclear negotiations, and it's unlikely that U.S. and Iranian negotiators will reach any deal in the next couple of weeks. And that's not going to satisfy critics of the negotiations because they'll likely prolong the talks, and especially critics in Congress who think that a possible deal will lead to Iran getting nuclear weapons.
Are they or are they not about to make a very bad deal that will allow the Iranians, one of the worst regimes in the world, to continue to have their nuclear infrastructure?
And now Iran is making even a new demand, probably slowing up negotiations even more. Julie, how did Tehran react to this election and victory by Netanyahu?
They pretty much didn't care. They said all the Israeli political parties are the same. They accused them of being aggressive, but basically they don't really care. They're all Zionists, as they call them.
Yeah, and how did this play in other capitals around the region?
Well, quietly, we've heard that like in Saudi Arabia, maybe Egypt, the Gulf states, they're happy that Netanyahu won because A, he stood up to President Obama, and B, he's the one who has the same kind of fears that they do about Iran. So they're quietly happy that Netanyahu won.
Yeah, and John, are we looking at a collision course between Netanyahu and the Obama administration on Iran?
It's hard to see where the common ground is. That's what the whole speech to Congress was about. Netanyahu laid out the Israeli position very clearly, and there was pretty much consensus among the Israeli parties that just fought each other so intensely in the elections about Iran. And if President Obama sticks with this course of demanding an agreement with a country that is bound and determined to get nuclear weapons, it's hard to see where the common ground is going to lead to some sort of rapport between the United States and Israel on this issue. Right. And you have the Congress factor where the pressure is going to be more heavy on the Obama administration not to make a bad deal.
Right. And finally, John, I know you've been tracking this. A lot of people prayed for this election. What impact do you think that had on what happened?
Well, I think that it was really pretty remarkable when you see the last couple weeks of the campaign, which from what we heard, that's when a lot of the prayer efforts were really focused. I think prayer went into it from the very beginning, but especially in the last week or so, there were intensive prayer efforts, not only here in Jerusalem, but around the world. And I think they had a significant impact on how the country came to vote and view the elections. A lot of people standing with Israel and praying for Israel.
Yeah. Okay, John, Julie, thank you. We'll have a lot to report on because now Netanyahu has their form of government, and this U.S.-Israel relations, we got a lot to look forward to in the next few weeks. Thanks a lot. Coming up, a mother's anguish. ISIS took her 4-year-old daughter. Now she prays for her safe return. The UN Security Council is meeting to discuss the plight of persecuted Christians in the Middle East. France's foreign minister called the meeting because he said, quote, "It is completely unacceptable what is happening to these minorities." France is the presiding member of the council at this time. Lawrence Fabius called the March 27th meeting because he said, "We are on the side of these communities." The French government has already made provision for Middle East Christians seeking asylum in their country. And Fabius earlier this year visited several displaced Christian communities. The brutality of Islamic State fighters is not limited to murder and destruction. It also expands into the horrific world of sex slavery. This next report comes from our friends at Voice of the Martyrs Canada. Greg Musselman brings us a story of a Christian mother who suffered a devastating loss.
Ida Hannah also wants to live in safety with her family. But as you'll soon hear, that is not her first priority right now. Ida's story is heartbreaking and demonstrates the evil and coldness of ISIS. She tells of the events leading up to her ongoing nightmare.
On the 6th of August, ISIS attacked Karakoush. I heard the explosions. Many people, including children and young people, died in the attack.
For the next 10 days, Ida and her husband Badu, who was blind, and their 3-year-old daughter Christina stayed in their home, not knowing what would happen next, living in fear. Thankfully, her other 3 children, including her 11-year-old son Christmas, had escaped to safety. Suddenly, ISIS broke their silence.
From the loudspeakers, we heard Allah Akbar, and the ISIS people announced all the Christians needed to leave the area, and if we didn't, they said they were going to kill us. They also said you can stay if you accept Islam. Do that or leave.
The militant Muslim group then rounded up all the Christians and brought them to a health center and briefly separated the men from the women.
They opened our luggage and took things like gold and money and left our luggage on the ground and made us go to the bus. After that, me, my husband, and daughter all went to the bus. We didn't take anything. I just held my daughter. Suddenly, one of the ISIS people just took her. He took my daughter from me. I started crying and my husband asked me what had happened. I said, they have taken our daughter. I followed him off the bus into a building.
Ida says Christina was then given to an older man with a long beard. She believes he was the leader of the ISIS group in that area and described him as having evil eyes. She pleaded with him to give her young daughter back, but he ordered her to get back on the bus. He told her to shut up and that if she said another word or came near her daughter, he would call his men to slaughter her right there.
I was begging him, and my daughter was crying and screaming because she needed her mother. But he looked at me with his dark eyes and said, "Go now," and I started to cry. I felt like they were going to kill me if I stayed even one more minute.
Ida returned to the bus distraught. Her husband was unable to chase after his wife and daughter because of his blindness. The Christians were then taken to the desert and dropped off with nothing. From there, they had to walk 7 hours to get to Erbil, where they were finally given food, water, and shelter in tents. Later, they would move to this unfinished shopping mall.
When we arrived here, my oldest son, who was 23 years old, asked me, "Where is my sister?" And I told him that she was taken, that she is gone. He became like crazy and started to cry and said they can't do that.
Although Ida reported to the local authorities in Erbil that her daughter was abducted by ISIS, she was told there was little they could do. 3 times she tried to go back to her village, but each time was prevented by the guards at the checkpoint from doing so, fearing ISIS would kill her.
I'm only asking God for my daughter to be returned to me. I need my daughter to come to me, to be back on my knee, and that she is healthy. That is all I need. I'll never lose hope that I will see her again. I just don't know when. I believe God can do it. I have dreams about her every single day.
VOM partner Ray Thorne read an emotional letter from a mother in the U.S. to Ida.
Words cannot express my grief
كلمات ما تقدر تعبر عن مشاعري
over the loss of your little girl.
لأنك خسرت بنتي.
I read your story
أنا قرأت القصة مالتي.
and I sat and wept while I was at work.
وأنا يعني بدي أصلي لك وبدي أبكي على موت بنتي.
She said, I wept for you and your family.
إحنا بكينا عليك وعلى العائلة كلها.
She said, I have a 3-year-old daughter of my own.
أنا عندي بنت عمرها 3 سنين.
The thought of losing her is crushing.
إنه أفقدها فشي خيالي موزي.
The Lord is near to the brokenhearted
الله قريب من أقوياء القلب والضعيفين.
and saves the crushed in spirit.
It's such a heartbreaking story. We encourage all our viewers to pray for this desperate mom and her daughter. And if you'd like to share your prayers and encouragement with Iraq's Christians and other believers around the world, simply post them on our Jerusalem Dateline Facebook page. Up next, a new exhibit sheds light on one of the bleakest periods of biblical history, how Jews survived the Babylonian captivity. Welcome back. One of the most significant times in Israel's history was the Jewish exile described in the books of Daniel, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. We're learning more about that time from ancient artifacts never before displayed. By the rivers of Babylon we sat and wept for Zion. Those are the words of Psalm 137, written when King Nebuchadnezzar destroyed Jerusalem and carried the Judeans away captive to an area that's present-day Iraq. It's also the name of a new exhibit at the Bible Lands Museum that Chief Curator Filip Vukosavovich calls an incredible puzzle.
What we do here is for the first time tell a complete story of the Babylonian exile from approximately 604 BC when Nebuchadnezzar comes for the first time to the land of Israel up to 539 when Cyrus and the Persians conquer Babylon and release all the exiles.
Much of the information for this exhibit came from these clay tablets written in Akkadian in ancient cuneiform script. On display for the first time ever, they tell of daily life in Al-Yahudu, the city of Judah in Babylonia.
Probably next to the Dead Sea Scrolls and the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, this is the most important documentation that has ever been revealed.
Museum director Amanda Weiss says it also opens a major chapter of Jewish history.
It's the thread that ties us to our ancestors.
Here we see an ancient tablet next to a modern one that tells the story. The texts talk about real people, exiled Judeans, and everyday life from rental agreements to tax issues.
One of these people is Haggai, son of Ahikam. I have actually chosen Haggai simply to narrate the story of the Babylonian exile that has never been told before.
In the exhibit, Haggai tells the story from the first exiles all the way to Babylon in 3 animated movies. Vukosavovich says he met Haggai in these texts.
I know his brothers, I know his father, I know his grandfather, grandmother. You know what? I know his great-grandfather. All of this through these new texts which nobody has seen before.
Weiss says one of her favorite parts of the exhibit is the model of the Al-Yahudu village.
We actually are showing interactively a scene in daily life, and you can see plowing the fields and rowing down the canals and the rivers and people cooking in their home fires in the evening and the date palm trees, and you get a sense of the cycle of life.
Part of what the tablets show is that the exiles lived prosperous lives and followed Jeremiah's command. Build houses and live in them, and plant gardens and eat their produce. Multiply there and do not decrease. And seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will have welfare.
So when in 539 Cyrus the Great and the Persians conquer Babylon, Cyrus simply releases all the exiles. Many decide to stay, like Haggai and his family. They had established lives. They had rich lives. They had their families. They had their schools. And only in 1950, 1952, following the establishment of the State of Israel, the state of Iraq simply expelled thousands and thousands of Jews. So just as they went with almost nothing, they returned with almost nothing. So that is a full circle of the Jewish people that were exiled and then returned after 2,500 years.
Up next, see what happens when you mix modern technology and ancient archaeology. Welcome back. What do you do when you cross the Dead Sea Scrolls with today's digital age? Here's an app in English that will help kids learn about the oldest written record in the Bible. They call it DigQuest, a new app that introduces kids to archaeology with unique games featuring Israel's ancient treasures. The app brings the Bible to life for young kids through archaeology and incorporates the Dead Sea Scrolls. This is the Conservation Lab at the Israel Antiquities Authority, and this is the original scroll 2,000 years ago from the book of Genesis. And it says in Genesis 1:1, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." And that's the first puzzle young users get to solve.
The kids are actually making a puzzle, 2,000-year-old fragments, some from the Bible, some sectarian. They were found in the Qumran caves in the 40s.
Ulrich Rosengarten of the Israel Antiquities Authority helped come up with the app.
We try and make an introduction for kids, connecting them to the subject, since we feel it's one of the most important discoveries of the 20th century.
It transforms iPhones or iPads into an archaeological tool, allowing players to get a feel of uncovering mysteries from the past.
You could be interested in archaeology, you could be interested in the Bible, Christian, Jewish.
Right now, 2 digs are based on real-life excavations, including the Dead Sea Scrolls found in Qumran.
The scrolls were found fragmentary, and the scholars have been working for years in order to put them together and try and read what's on it.
The app mimics real-life technology, such as spectral imaging, which brightens the script, making it easier to read. This process helped make the Dead Sea Scrolls available online.
So after you complete the puzzle, you could scan it and read the content much better. Whoever downloads the app gets a collection box, and he could add every item he completes into his collection box.
With the world speeding forward in the high-tech age, is archaeology still important? Rosengarten says yes.
It's our history. It's our legacy. It's our, if we don't learn from what we had, how would we progress today?
Whether it's the Dead Sea Scrolls or ancient artifacts from the Babylonian exile, it seems like we're learning more about Israel's ancient history. Well, that's it for this edition. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.